Imagine a modern manufacturing plant. The roof is covered in solar panels, the lighting is highly efficient, and the company proudly announces that its facility is completely carbon neutral. Now, step outside the gates of that facility. Picture the fleet of heavy logging trucks hauling timber, the massive open-pit mines extracting iron, diesel-burning cargo ships crossing the ocean, and the overflowing landfills where the packaging ends up years later. The factory's own equipment and the electricity it buys to keep the lights on make up Scope 1 and Scope 2 emissions. But when we account for the massive network supporting that building, the direct emissions from the site itself represent a small fraction of the total footprint. This diagram illustrates the complete picture. With Scope 1 and 2 in the center, we are left with Scope 3, 15 categories of indirect emissions. These divide into two loops: upstream, for everything before production, and downstream, for everything after it is sold. This chart shows that for almost every industry, from retail to construction, Scope 3 dominates the total carbon footprint. The indirect activity in the supply chain creates far more pollution than the factory's own daily operations. Let's walk backward out the receiving doors at the rear of our factory. We are entering the upstream timeline, the before phase of a business. Category 1 covers purchased goods and services. If our factory builds wooden furniture, their footprint includes the exhaust from machinery harvesting the timber long before it reaches their loading dock. Category 2 is capital goods. These are the long-term items a company buys to exist. The heavy industrial saws and assembly robots inside our furniture plant took a tremendous amount of steel, heat, and energy to build. The factory inherits that carbon debt the moment they buy the machines. Categories 3 and 4 track the energy and movement required to get things to the factory. This includes emissions from digging coal out of the ground before it is burned for electricity, as well as the exhaust from the freight trucks hauling raw timber to the facility doors. A company's environmental responsibility begins long before they actually manufacture a single item. They own the emissions required to simply stock their shelves and prepare for a day's work. The upstream timeline also includes the human and operational costs of keeping a business alive. Category 5 tracks waste. The factory's wastewater processing and the office trash decaying in a distant landfill both release greenhouse gases into the atmosphere. Category 8 covers upstream leased assets. If our factory rents a downtown office suite, the heating and cooling of that rented space is added to their carbon tally. Next up, Category 6 tracks business travel. When company executives flawed across the country to secure a new retail contract, the jet fuel burned is a direct consequence of business. Category 7 is employee commuting. Every gallon of gas burned by workers driving their personal cars to the factory shift every morning contributes to the company's total emissions. A business's footprint is measured by its daily existence. Employing people, producing trash, and holding meetings all carry a measurable carbon weight. Now, let's walk all the way to the shipping doors at the front of the factory. We are crossing into the downstream timeline, the after phase, once the product is sold. Categories 9 and 10 follow the physical movement of the goods. This covers the cargo vans delivering the product to retail stores, or the emissions of a secondary factory that processes your raw materials into something new. This chart shows Category 11, use of sold products. For many companies, this is the largest source of carbon. If automakers build gas-powered cars, they are accountable for exhaust generated every time a customer fills the tank and drives it over the next decade. Category 12 is end-of-life treatment. When customers eventually throw the product or its packaging into the garbage, the chemical breakdown of those materials in a dump completes the timeline. Selling an item binds a company to the environmental impact of that object for its entire functional lifespan and its eventual disposal. We also have to consider companies that make their money without shipping physical boxes, like real estate firms, fast food chains, and banks. Categories 13 and 14 cover companies renting out owned equipment or operating franchise stores. If you license your brand name to a local restaurant owner, the energy they use to fry food and light their dining room belongs to your footprint. Finally, Category 15 tracks investments, which is by far the primary source of carbon emissions for the entire financial sector. If a bank approves a $1 billion loan to build a new offshore oil rig, that project only exists because of the bank's capital. Therefore, the bank is partially responsible for the resulting carbon pumped into the sky. The downstream categories capture all the ripple effects of a company's output, whether a business generates a tangible item, a brand identity, or investment capital. They ultimately own the carbon that follows. 15 categories is a lot of information to track. In practice, most organizations focus their initial reduction efforts on the big four: the goods they purchase, their employee travel, how their products are used, and the projects they invest in. This infographic provides a summary of the entire timeline. You have 8 upstream categories on the left, representing everything required to build the product, and 7 downstream categories on the right, tracking the product's journey into the world. If you are ever asked to explain this concept, here is a simple way to phrase it. Scope 3 encompasses 15 categories of indirect emissions created throughout a company's entire business network, divided into 8 upstream and 7 downstream segments. Measuring Scope 3 provides the data needed to see through the walls of the factory and map the actual environmental cost of every single operation, from the mine to the landfill. By identifying and reporting these 15 categories, a company can finally begin to account for the full scale of its climate impact. True progress starts with looking beneath the surface to address the parts of the business that were previously hidden from view.